A lot of people ask, what toys do we use when we're doing child-parent psychotherapy? So today I thought I'd give you a toy tour. This is what we bring when we go on home visits. It's nice if it's rolling, but you can also use an old suitcase. So let's take a look and see what's inside my duffel bag. So we're going to start with the animal families. I'm just going to pour them out here, and you can see it doesn't really matter which animals you have. You can have multiple families, multiple parents, and think about the families that you're seeing and what they might need. It's also really good if you have a dinosaur or somebody who can be kind of a bad guy, because sometimes kids need a bad guy to fight. So this guy looks pretty fierce and like somebody that you might want to fight, and a lot of kids really like my flying dinosaur. So that sometimes the flying dinosaur is doing bad things, and it's really for the parent dinosaur or the mama lion to fight them. So it's nice to have a variety of different animals. So I also sometimes bring a collection of people, and I'll pour these out for you as well. Not everybody has this collection, but it's important to think about the families that you're working with and think about their cultural and ethnic background as well, and the number of children that they might have in the families and the number of adults. So I'm just going to show you a few of them. So I like to have some folks who are older. On occasion, I like to have people with different body types. So whenever I can, I select them. We want a good selection of babies, and that children can hopefully see themselves in the dolls and in the families. And when we don't have dolls that really match the ethnic or cultural background of the family, it is often important to acknowledge that unfortunately, currently they're not making a lot of Asian dolls and Latino dolls. But these are just some of the ways that children tell their stories. Some children really gravitate towards the people, and they really like to show how sometimes their people fight, and the little kids might have watched and might have done things. Other kids really like to use the animals. And so once we figure out what a kid might prefer, that's what we put in our toy bag when we're visiting them. You never know what a kid's going to gravitate towards. So this is just an angry face, and I remember that one kid called him Broccoli Head, and really liked this little guy because they were able to say that sometimes grown-ups' faces looked like this. And so just remember that you might pack a toy bag, and serendipitously, sometimes the most random toys have a lot of value for a kid. So I've got Hulk here. Hulk is really great. You don't have to buy Hulk, but it's good to have a character who sometimes switches from being angry to being more calm. And here we have Batman as well. Batman is an archetypal figure that a lot of kids like. So I brought the animals and the dolls because families often use them to tell their stories. I also brought just some basic blocks. And you can choose between blocks and Legos. It's good to have Duplos because with little Legos, kids spend a lot of time with them, and we really want them to be able to spend their time telling stories. So blocks are great, and let me just show you. I'm going to pour these out. Blocks are great because they can be used in a lot of ways. They can be used to build homes. And then sometimes kids will show us how these homes, I'm going to take my dinosaur, get destroyed, right? They can be used to build walls, they can be used to build protection. They can also be used to build weapons sometimes. So we never know how a kid is going to use these toys, but it's nice to have them so that they can really be creative in telling their stories. So you don't need all of these things, I just have them. It's useful to have a stethoscope. Kids often use it to check out their caregivers, to see how they're doing. They like to give people medicine. When kids have had medical trauma, it's important to have a syringe because they like to often give us shots. And we can talk about how painful it is and how confusing it is when things are painful. They like to check people out, so something like this and some Band-Aids are useful. Other than that, it's useful if you're working with a child who's had medical trauma to think about what specifically might they have gone through and what other things might you put in your medical kit. For example, we had a kid who had gone through, her intestines were coiled, and we decided that it would be really important to keep some rope in this toolkit, so we could show sort of how her intestines were coiled. Other kids have really needed scalpels because they've had cuts, and some kids have really wanted masks to show how they had a mask over their face. And one of the things that we think about is that these toys actually, in a way, they act to help the kids sort of think about what they've been through. They're sort of props and memory triggers, in a way, that help move along the child's ability to tell their story if they want. Now, one thing I wanted to show you, though, is while I have these toys, some kids don't always like them. And I'm just remembering as I spilled out these toys that one child who had had a lot of medical trauma, when she saw the doctor's kit, she started screaming. And so then I said, I wonder, Mom, if we should pack them away. And she said, I said, maybe we should put them away and lock them up. And she was like, yes. So I wanted to share that because even though we bring toys to help children and families talk about their experiences, sometimes it can be triggering. Sometimes even just bringing out a family can be triggering to a child or representing their parent. So it's important that we know that we bring the toys because we speak the unspeakable, and that we can intervene even when kids say, nope, I don't want that toy. Other things that are typically in our toy bag include dishes, maybe some pots and pans, and food. Okay. And so along with food, I have a baby bottle because we work with really young kids, and oftentimes, and I have a baby because oftentimes they're gonna wanna show kind of how they feed the baby, right? Now, a lot of kids use these toys as nurturing toys to kind of take a break, to show connection and love. And it's really important that we remember what is the particular child or children's history when we're working with them. So in my work, sometimes what I've seen kids do is when they've had a really challenging history, they might do things like grab the baby by the foot or hit the baby. And I just want to think about how hard that is for us and for caregivers to see. And sometimes caregivers might say, oh, you're hurting the baby. And that would be what we would call a port of entry, where we might pause and think about, oh, the poor baby. But we would want to differentiate between the child hurting the baby and the child showing us that the baby was hurt. And so sometimes when the babies are crying because there is no food, we would say, oh, the baby is so hungry. The baby doesn't have any food. And we would be helping the caregiver to think about how we're remembering that you told us that he once had a time when he was hungry and he had no food. And that really shifts the dynamic from look what the kid is doing with the baby to really feeling the suffering of the child when they were a baby. And so I just wanted to bring that up because when we have these toys together, food, babies, it's important to remember their history so that we can better understand how the child is playing. And it's also important to remember the caregiver's history so we can think about how what the child is doing affects them, whether it's their own personal history or shared history that they have. So sometimes what we might see is that a child has really created in some ways a scene, co-created it with their caregiver, where they have sort of a villain, right? And then they have their caregiver, maybe their dad, and they've represented themselves as well as a little baby, and they're asking their parent to fight, right? And they're not saying, hey, they're not so clear with us. They don't say, hey, dad, fight. But they're like, oh no, he's coming to get him. And then we might say, oh, I don't think the dad likes that, right? And the dad might say, no, I don't. And I say, I'm wondering if the dad is going to fight the dragon. And so the dad would pick up the dragon and fight them and really kind of, and the dad would kind of in a way, because of what you talked about, or you might say, Daddy is fighting the dragon. Daddy is making sure that nothing happens to you because he knows that before bad things happen to the baby and Daddy doesn't want that to happen anymore. Right? And that even while you're doing that, some kids will sort of abruptly shift and they'll say, I want to do something else. And they'll actually go out and they'll go back to the food toys that maybe you've put away or maybe they're in your bag. They'll start poking around your bag and they'll spill them out and they'll simply cook. And this might be a child who has really no history of food insufficiency, and they spend a lot of time with these toys, kind of going back and forth and cooking. And they cook for you, and they serve you food, and they serve the dad food. And the parent might be very invested in this scene over here. And this is going to go back to that concept of emotional process fidelity, of the child really, as they were talking about this stuff, their bodies started feeling all those feelings inside. Remember that cup filling up? And they really needed to go back and do something that was soothing and calming. So for some kids, the toys help them to tell a story that is difficult when they didn't have food. And just for other kids, they're simply important to have as a way to take a break. We typically have emergency toys. So we have fire engines, we have an ambulance. It's really ideal if your ambulance can fit people in it. And we have another ambulance and police cars. And these are because often paramedics and police and ambulances have come to their house. Some children need helpers. Of course, we have to remember that in some families, some emergency workers like police are not always viewed as helpers. And so again, we're thinking about the specific history of the family, even as we bring these toys in and think about it with their caregivers. And so lastly, you don't have to have these, but I have these puppets. So it's nice to have somebody who has teeth when a kid bites, so that you can act out those little scenes. It's nice to have, somebody who kind of is sort of sweet, like this little guy, right? Sometimes kids act out stories. And what's really amazing is that children often, if you ask them a question or talk about their behavior, it's really hard. But if you talk about my little friend, who sometimes when you get mad, you really bite, and it's scary. And I wonder if your mama can help you or your auntie can help you with that. Right? And so there's just different ways that we approach this through the magic of play. So these are some of the things that are in my toy bag, and I really think a lot about the specific child, and I think with the family about what I'm putting in my toy bag. And on occasion, we have special toys. So for example, one of the kids that I worked with, she was actually in an ambulance because she was hurt really badly. And it was really important to her that she be able to put people in an ambulance to show what it was like. And so I'm just gonna open this up and show you the inside, and you can even see that there's a little stretcher in there that comes out. And it was important to her to put the little figure on there because it was so scary. And then to really even play the siren, right? Because one of the things that I learned from her, and you can hear this sound going, as grown-ups, we really want to go, hey, let's turn that off, because that's annoying. But I want you to imagine that there's a little kid who's inside that ambulance. And just think about how they didn't get to turn the siren off when they were inside the ambulance. And so when they find this toy, often they just want to push it because they're showing us, hey, once I was in an ambulance and it was confusing and it was scary. So I'm hoping that one of the things that you're seeing is that we often say we're playing, and it's not exactly playing. What it is that toys allow children to tell stories about things they could never say with words, things that often happened when they were nonverbal. And what's really amazing is that sometimes the children that we work with have gone through experiences that happened when they were 1 or 2, before they had a lot of language. And as symbolic play emerges, because the child is getting older and more capable, they actually act out scenes that happened when they were little. It's kind of mind-blowing. We heard about a child who at the age of 15 months put a little baby, and I wish I had it here, but they put a little baby under the crib. And they just kept putting the baby under the crib. And when the parents saw that the child was doing this, they said, oh my goodness, that's where she would hide when we were fighting. And if you think about that, how would a little 15-month-old say, it was scary for me when you used to fight? They can't necessarily say that with words, but it is amazing if we give them the space, what they can show us when we give them some of the things that we call toys, that they can represent their stories. And the real beauty then is that their caregivers are really so beautiful that they want to help their kids, and when they see what their kids are saying through this, they think, oh my goodness, it was scary for you, and we're sorry, and we're trying to change things. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to show parents, to show aunts and uncles, grandparents, foster parents, whoever I'm working with, what's in the toy bag. I like to pack it with them so that we can think together about what it'll be like to have these objects in the room. And we can think together about not how the kid is going to play with them, but what they might do given what we both know about their history. And that really kind of clues us in as caregivers to kind of, if a child who's been hungry starts picking up the food toys and playing with them, we become more alert. We think, oh, this might really have a deeper meaning. And we do what I say, we lean in. Because otherwise, if we're not alert to that, what we tend to do is to just be like, oh, they're just playing. What is the possible meaning of this? One of the things that's really important to know, though, is that children often cloak their play in mystery. And so I'm just going to push some of these out of the way. I'm going to use the people toys for this. And let me just pull out a family. So I've laid out a family, and we work with all different kinds of families. But here what I've chosen is a mom and a dad who sometimes have really not gotten along well and have fought, and the kids have seen it, right? And so if we would imagine that they're fighting. But one thing that might be really confusing is, what if the little boy depicts himself as a fireman, right? So he's not being so kind to us as picking the doll that would be appropriate for his size. And so he's got the fireman, and then he's also showing a baby, and there is no baby in the family. And so they sometimes cloak their play in a little bit of mystery. And sometimes when things happen in the family, and they're showing fighting, they might show that actually a lion has come in. And a lion is coming in and harming people and destroying the whole family. And I'm doing kind of something that a kid might do. And of course, there's been no lion. Now, we as therapists, we might understand, oh, the child is showing us that sometimes people get sort of tossed about by anger. In a way, the lion is a symbol of anger. We don't really know. We want to remain curious, right? But if I'm a parent and I'm not a trained child therapist, it could be super confusing because, like, look, there's a fireman who's not my kid, there's an extra baby, and there's a lion who's destroying the house. This is part of our role. I sometimes think about how I speak play, and play is a particular language, kind of like I speak Spanish. And when I'm working with somebody who may not speak play, it's important for me to think with them about what might be the meaning of what the child is saying because they're speaking another language. And play is a super complex language because it often has multiple meanings. So we as grown-ups, we tend to think really linearly, and we tend to think about how a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And actually, that's something that we're socialized into when we start going to school, is to tell our stories that way. But children often tell stories about things were dangerous. Oh my goodness, things were dangerous. And all of a sudden, right, then the police came and brrr, and people went away. And when they went away, it felt like they were being tossed, right? It felt like things were happening. And it's really hard and chaotic to understand what they're doing if someone's not helping them. And it can be really actually hard for us to understand. And it would be a real miss to say, I really know exactly what's happening here. And this is where reflective supervision comes in, where it would be really useful to kind of think about later on, what is it that the child was doing? And how is it that we might understand this? Because next week when the kid comes in, often we see a really similar scene. And it's helpful to think about what might the possible meanings be given what the caregiver has shared with us. So we can then, when it happens again, we can say, wow, there's a lot of fighting happening, and then people are not together again, and it's so scary. And as those words come out of us, sometimes the caregivers, look at us, and they know that that's exactly what happened in their family. Not as a beginning, middle, and an end, but as an entirety. And it's really shocking to see these very tiny beings are struggling with making meaning of all of these things that have happened.